All right, what's up, residents of Demon Reach? This is Steven and Ben back with another Phantology review of another Dresden Files book. And we are sad to report that we're really kind of getting to the end of the currently released Dresden Files. So we're covering Skin Game, which is book 15. Peace Talks is out already. Josh and I have reviewed that with Mike from Mike's Book Reviews. And then we're getting Battleground in under a month now. It's actually on the 27th, I think. So about 3 weeks. When this episode actually comes out, it'll probably be pretty close. So Ben, I know you said you're already kind of getting some post-book depression, right? Some post-series depression.
Yeah, I've actually, I've already finished Peace Talks. And so I've started moving on to reading the short stories, which I kind of neglected to do before finishing the main series. So that's kind of letting me down easy on my post-series depression right now.
So are you in Briefcases or what's the other one?
Well, it's like a compilation, right?
Yeah, there's two compilations, Briefcases and what is the other one called? I'm going to come up with it.
Side Jobs is the one I'm reading.
Side Jobs. Okay, Side Jobs is the first one, I think. The earlier, the short stories that are earlier on.
Yeah, so the two short stories I've read, one is where Dresden meets Murphy for the first time.
Oh, yeah, the way back.
He's also employed by Nick, who is like specializes in finding missing children, which was actually referenced in one of the main series books that he sends. Oh, when in Cold Days, in Ghost Story, he sends that one troubled kid to Nick's the private detective agency for help.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah, we have a trolling comment coming in from YouTube, but we'll just continue on. Yeah, I think that's fun to see. The prequel to the entire series. That's the one with the troll, right? Murphy and Dresden are fighting a troll at the end of that one.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was a fun one. And now there's a short story involving Billy's wedding, and that was also referenced. And it seemed like it was kind of more instrumental to the plot of the main series.
That one's more important because Maeve comes in and screws it up, and then that kind of adds to the conflict there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so we'll see if we get enough clamor for it, we can go ahead and review those short stories as well. One thing we really do want to do is do like a tier list ranking of the Dresden Files books. I mean, other YouTubers, podcasts have done this, but I think it'd be fun to get our opinion on that.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's funny because looking back on Dresden, there's clearly like standout books. You know what I mean? When I was reading it, I was thinking, oh, this book, it's fun. They're all fun, But now looking back on it, there's clearly like these books that just stick with you a little bit more.
So we're talking Skin Game now. How does this one stack up for you? Is this a standout?
I think it's a standout. Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of fun with Cold Days. And so I thought that the pacing on that was just so nonstop. Skin Game is also pretty nonstop, but I don't know. I feel like it was a little bit of a letdown from Cold Days.
Most Dresdens are pretty nonstop. That's one of the brands of Dresden, this constant action.
Yeah, that's true.
I think the criticism that I see most on Skin Game is after the build-up from Changes and Ghost Story and Cold Days, where you were having so many big plot elements changing and you had so many like really large series-wide things coming out, then Skin Game is much more of a zoomed-in, contained story. It's a heist story. And some of these things that were set up, like the Outsiders and the Outer Gates and this huge conflict with Nemesis, which I still really shouldn't say out loud, but I'm tempting fate here. Anyway, those things are not nearly as important for Skin Game. We kind of put a pause on those things.
Yeah, and so that's kind of one thing that I mentioned right when I finished this was it did feel like we were taking a step back from those big overall plot lines, which makes it seem almost like it's kind of getting back to the roots a little bit of what Dresden was, and maybe those big plot lines were just there because it was kind of the center of the series, and now we're just gonna do a little bit more build up until we're ready to take on those things. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think some people really have a big hang up on this, and others are able to say like, okay, we're fine zooming in and going back to a more contained Dresden plot and peace talks. We really start to see things ramped up again. So I do think long term, I mean, obviously Butcher's going towards this Armageddon thing at the very end, this trilogy at the very end of the series. So we're going towards this thing that's becoming more of an epic fantasy, but this one is more of a smaller urban fantasy.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's talk some Skin Game plot. So if you haven't read it yet, go ahead and read it and then come back on and let us know your thoughts. So it's been about a year. It's been over a year, actually, I think, since Cold Days. And Harry has this parasite in his head that's been referenced a few times, but hasn't been resolved yet. And we know that we need Molly in order to solve this problem. And it's causing Harry a lot of pain to the point where I think he needs to stay at Demon Reach, right? He's unable to really venture outside the island.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he needs to stay in Demon Reach, and it's kind of unclear why that is, besides the fact that it's kind of his domain. So I did enjoy the fact that Harry and Molly's roles have kind of been reversed in the fact that it seems like he needs her more than she needs him at this point. So that was interesting.
And it's been a year since we've seen her become the Winter Lady, so we're not really sure exactly what this change means for her. I think we can assume that it's something similar to the change that Harry underwent with becoming the Winter Knight. But yeah, that's not clear. And like you say, it's nice to see Molly now becoming a completely independent character to the point where she no longer needs Harry, and Harry's dependent on her to save his life.
Yeah. What did you think about the parkour?
The parkour. Oh, this is like Harry's training. What is he doing with parkour?
Yeah, when was this book released? Was it?
I think is it 2015? Yeah.
2014.
Okay,
yeah.
14.
Yeah, it just seemed kind of like this is like the heyday of parkour. Maybe parkour was a little bit before that. Parkour seemed like it was like the late 2010, like late aughts.
I mean, we talked about Hummers being big back when Thomas had a Hummer. And yeah, I think parkour was probably around this time, or I mean, it was at least big enough to be on top of Butcher's mind.
Yeah, so it was just so funny, like imagining Harry kind of sprinting through this prison that housed the most dangerous of criminals, yelling parkour at the top of his voice as he was leaping over boulders, and he kind of used that as his battle cry a little bit later on in the book as well. And so I thought it just made me chuckle every time. It made me think about that scene in The Office.
Oh yeah, when did they jump into the trash can?
or like Michael Scott's just like jumping on, like rolling on the couch.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, where would Dresden be without a cheesy battle cry?
Yeah, nowhere. And I think somebody calls him out on parkour at the battle cry, and he's like, I don't criticize your Latin, or I think it was Michael that criticized him. I don't know, I forget, but somebody called him out on it.
Okay. Yeah, like fans have been wanting to do for books.
Yeah.
All right, so like you say, the book starts down in the prisons of Demon Reach. This was something that we learned about in the previous book, and we've got all these really troublesome, we'll say, to say the least, prisoners down here, magical beings of unrivaled power that Demon Reach is holding. We are speculating that eventually there's going to be a large-scale prison break that we're going to have to deal with. I mean, why is Butcher showing us a prison if not to eventually break things out of it? But we will see what happens there. Anyway, the action starts as Harry's talking with Alfred, who I think we maybe mistakenly said that he had named him Alfred previously, but this is maybe the first time that he's actually called him Alfred. And Harry then meets up with Mab and learns that the parasite is going to emerge and kill Harry in just a few days here. She's been blocking his messages to Molly because she wants to give herself leverage, and she says, you need to do something for me in order to have me let my winter lady help you. She gives him an earring that will suppress the pain that the parasite is causing. And then they leave the island, meet with Nicodemus, our favorite Denarian, and they learn about the job here. So Mab is loaning Nicodemus Harry to assist in the robbing of Hades' vault in the underworld. So nice little start to a heist story here.
Yeah, so this was really cool. I couldn't help but think that which Harry Potter book was it where Harry's getting like super depressed because none of his friends are writing to him during the summer, and he's like, nobody cares about me. I feel.
Sure. This is when Dobby's taking his letters, so it's book 2.
Oh yeah, book 2. This reminds me a lot of Harry at the beginning of this book. Like, why won't anybody write to me? Nobody cares about me. Not even Thomas comes down and visits.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of, and then you find out that there's a good reason that the island basically makes people feel very bad, and so that's why they don't come out.
I mean, we've known the island is dangerous for a while now. Not just anyone can go on the island whenever they want to.
Yeah, that's true. But I feel like in one part of this book, Harry, I think Michael explains to him that it's the like worst that Michael has ever felt on the island, and not just because that's where he got shot. It was like he didn't want to step foot on the island. So it's like if somebody as brave as Michael doesn't even want to go there, then it shows you how powerful it is.
I guess we assume that's because of the giant prison here. Maybe there's another reason. We'll see.
Yeah.
So the plot goes on, and Mab tells Harry that, I expect you to do some backstabbing, and you don't necessarily need to make sure that Nicodemus gets everything he wants. So, make me proud as my winter knight. Harry gets Murphy to be his backup after doing some research that is really unclear thus far. It's going to be really important later. We're going to have a flashback. So as we get to the very climax, and we call back to what Harry's doing at the very beginning, and it's a nice reveal. Butcher puts a really nice twist into the plot, and we learn that Hades is a collector of holy artifacts. This actually really ties in well with what Phantology is doing this month of September. We're doing a top 3 fantasy artifacts competition on Twitter. So if you listen to this and it gets out in time, we actually probably will have started by the time this episode comes out. But join on Twitter, follow our polls, and vote for your favorite fantasy artifacts prizes for the winner. We just recorded our episode going over our picks not too long ago. So I'm excited to see what artifacts are the most popular. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was exciting that it was very clear at the very beginning that this was just going to be a heist, and you were just getting ready for Harry and crew to plan the perfect heist. And it seemed like Nicodemus was actually the mastermind behind every part of this, which was also just a very, the last time we saw Nicodemus, I'm sure he was trying to kill somebody, right? So, it was when Harry had almost strangled him to death using his...
Yes, the second time Harry tried to strangle him in small favor.
Right. And so it was cool to see Nicodemus in a new light and to see kind of his criminal mastermind come out from the inside.
And obviously interesting to see Harry working with Nicodemus, this spirit of evil, pretty much, fallen angel.
Right. Of course, that doesn't really last long throughout the book, right? They kind of work together, don't work together, work together, don't work together.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a nice frenemy relationship. Dresden has maybe the best frenemies in fantasy. If we were your top frenemies in our Twitter polls, I'm throwing in Dresden frenemies. Yeah. Yeah, we're guaranteeing it. Phantology is guaranteeing a frenemies comparison at some point. So we'll talk frenemies more. Anyway, we go on. Harry goes back to Nicodemus's headquarters. There's a bunch of goats randomly hanging out here. So okay, we'll see what that is. Binder is there. We've seen him before. Nicodemus has an associate named Hannah Asher, and Binder is sent to go pick up a new mysterious guy named Goodman Gray. We'll see who this dude is. And then Harry and Hannah are sent to pick up Anna Valmont, who we've seen before. She was a thief that was used in Death Masks, book 5. I think one of the earlier Dresden and Denarian books.
Mm-hmm. And so this is a cool example of Dresden having enough like C and D list characters that he's able to wrap these people back into it and kind of rewrite their personality. I feel like Binder definitely got a personality refresh in this book. And it actually gives me hope for I know one of the criticisms I had of Cold Days was the Red Hat wasn't very convincing as a villain.
Yeah.
But if later on in the series Dresden pulls him back in like he did with Binder, that could be good too. So it was cool to see this.
Yeah, I'm guessing Butcher has a master spreadsheet of some kind of internal wikia of all his characters that he can pull from.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, these were two characters that were somewhat main characters in these previous books, right? So it's not like they're totally obscure, but I really appreciate Binder being kind of the charming one of the group in this one. He's always quick with the witty comment and just kind of adds a fun dynamic to it.
Yeah, whenever you have frenemies, you know you're going to have witty banter going back and forth.
Yeah.
So the first fight of the book happens now here with the Fomor. The Fomor are this mysterious group that we've seen a little bit in the past couple books. They're these amphibious, water-based things that were ancient enemies of the Fae that have now come and put a big have now turned up and are causing problems in Chicago and elsewhere. We get a lot more of this in peace talks, and they seem like maybe let's not spoil anything for peace talks, but watch out for them there. So there's much fighting. We have some Harry's shot in the leg. Hannah has this fire magic, and then they kind of all escape, and they all get back to Nicodemus's headquarters, and Harry heads over to Murphy's place.
Yeah, so this was just another example of the action starting. Kind of the characters can't even seem to say hello without somebody attacking them. So
yeah, Butcher does a great job of the show don't tell type things with this action that really draws you in. So rather than just saying Harry goes around and picks up all of the characters and they get together and they go off on the heist, instead he uses the action to push the plot along and get people together. And that's fantastic. That's kind of like the modern way to do fantasy.
Yep.
If you think back to the beginning of Stormlight Archive, no spoilers there, but I think that's my favorite example of getting right into a story with some action, explaining some really complicated magic right away. Like you're just going along with the characters and no one's sitting down to tell you what's happening. You're able to watch it from the driver's seat.
Yeah. So Stephen, what did you think about Harry's decision to bring Murphy along with him here?
So we trust Murphy, right? This is a big thing. This is something with Butters that is explored because Butters doesn't trust Harry. He has trouble doing so. I mean, with good reason, right? Because Harry's now picked up the Winter Night mantle, and there are a lot of devious creatures out there in the supernatural. But Murphy is someone that Harry can implicitly trust, always. And that really adds to the depth of their relationship. And I think the fact that he chooses her over maybe a more powerful ally, such as a Thomas, really shows that level of trust.
So I agree. I feel like it shows a few things for his character. One, that he doesn't mind putting Murphy in danger. He used to actively avoid it or say it's her choice. I'm going to tell her what's up and it's her choice. Yeah. But now he's almost recruiting her, which I think is a different thing. It's one thing to say there's this situation and I need your help, or there's a situation, come along if you want, versus saying there's a situation and please come with me as my number 2. You know what I mean? It's a little different versus, like you say, why wouldn't he bring Thomas in, somebody that's maybe more adept to handle dangerous situations and not as fragile. And also we know that Thomas and Harry wouldn't betray each other, so I don't know. I feel it was kind of an awkward choice for me at this point.
Do you think it's irresponsible of him to involve her, a mortal, in something that is obviously so dangerous?
Yeah, especially when it's not her fight. You know what I mean? It's between the Winter Court and favors that Mav owes, and so why are we involving Murphy here? I don't know. It's just
Typically, she likes to get involved in stuff that's Chicago related, stuff that
right.
mortals could be endangered by. And so, yeah, like you say, involving her in something that is purely supernatural, maybe that does seem a little odd. Maybe their relationship is just to the point where he knows that she wants to have his back no matter what's going on.
Yeah, it almost seemed like getting the number two person was such a big political win for him, and it didn't end up being like he didn't have a master plan with it. You know what I mean? He kind of lucked into having a more powerful ally later on.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know.
And it seems like maybe this is something he regrets because of what happens with Murphy. She gets seriously beat up by Nicodemus later on, and this is something that still is plaguing her in future books. So
Yeah.
maybe Harry would have, if Harry could have gone back, maybe he would have chosen someone else.
Yeah.
But it is, Murphy does agree to it, and I think she understands the risks involved. It's not her first rodeo.
Right. Yeah. I think this completely fits with Murphy's character, like saying, hey, I'm here for whatever you need. But I don't think it definitely shows that Harry's more okay with putting Murphy in the line of fire.
And perhaps this is a little bit of the rashness of the Winter Mantle coming to play, where he doesn't necessarily care about helping the damsel in distress as much. That part of his personality.
That could be true.
So the next part of the plot, we've got to get this dude named Harvey Morrison, because the Fomor have information on him, and we don't know exactly what's going on yet, but Nicodemus says we need to do it. We meet up with Butters, who is over at Murphy's, and he helps with Harry's leg, which just got shot. And then when Harry wakes up again, he gets kind of this mysterious message and doesn't understand what it is, and then Butters is there. Harry helps Butters, or gives him a backup safe house based off of the debt that he owes him from Cold Days. And then he finds out that Harry, so they have this conversation about Butters, lacking or doubting Harry's good guy status. And we kind of commented on this previously, but then Murphy comes in and says, Harry, I trust you. So that's maybe the difference between, and that really, that's why Harry chose Murphy, is my conclusion.
Yeah. So I agree with that. I think that this is a cool scene. I think that the Harry pretending to be asleep and overhearing things between that Butters is saying is kind of getting a bit old at this point. And it also has become the fact that like Butters has become almost an info dump for Harry's physical abilities. Because in this scene we learn that Harry might not be being given extra strength, but is able to tap into his natural strength at much higher levels, but that going to accrue a big cost on him later.
That may be like fully explained a little bit later on, but it's definitely something that we learn in this one.
Yeah. And somehow Butters, I mean, it makes sense that because Butters has kind of a mind for this stuff and has been thinking about magical bodies and abilities for the past 10 years, it seems like. And so it makes sense, but it definitely does. It felt to me like a forced info dump on what the Winter Mantle actually is and allows Harry to do.
Yeah, so the idea is rather than just giving him unlimited strength, he ignores pain thresholds, etc. And if he's not careful, he could seriously injure himself to the point where like his bones can only withstand so much force, even though the Winter Mantle gives him a lot more power.
Right, and we kind of see this, right? Because has Harry already broken his arm at this point, or does that come? That comes a bit later, right?
I think it's a bit later because he's just shot at this point.
Yeah, he's trying to rescue. Yeah, but throughout this book, he gets shot, he gets his arm snapped, and he kind of just shrugs him off.
Right. Yeah. So Harry then goes back to sleep and contacts Molly, And Molly says, okay, I'm on my way, but it's going to take me a while to get there. And then we get a real steamy sex scene dream between Harry and Murphy that he realizes he doesn't realize it's a dream until Murphy turns into Denarian and shoots him. And this is maybe a little bit foreboding, but also one of the steamier scenes in the Dresden Files.
Yeah, that was kind of a scene out of nowhere. I don't know. I know that you guys talked about the irony and peace talks right between this scene and what happens in that book. So yeah, I'm not sure if I love this.
Yeah. Maybe just, yeah, I kind of question why we didn't see this for real, why it was a dream and why it was so explicit in the dream.
Right. And it might show like a few theories. It might show like the Winter Mantle, like making him his subconscious, as well as we know that Harry's subconscious is a character in and of itself almost in the series and plays a bigger role in this book than most. So maybe his subconscious was telling him something.
So the plot goes on, and we still need to go get this guy named Harvey. We learn that Goodman Gray is this kind of mysterious shapeshifter and is pretty powerful, but we don't know too much about him yet. And then Deirdre and Tessa, Nicodemus's wife and daughter, show up with a bunch of goons, and we know this is going to be problematic because we were told earlier in Small Favor, when Tessa and Nicodemus show up in the same place, then heads are going to roll, and right away they do because they bring in a bunch of ghouls. And if we think back to, what book was that where Harry goes to Mexico? I think it was it Small Favor again or Turncoat? And it was kind of one of those later books. We learned that Harry has this real hatred for ghouls. And so this is where he breaks his arm, actually. And Goodman Gray comes in and takes out a bunch of these ghouls. So fighting and plot stuff is happening here.
Yeah. And we also learned that that the guy that they're trying to save ends up dying. And it's unclear who killed him. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of a mystery. You don't know if Goodman Gray killed him, or even though he claims he doesn't, you don't really know.
But they do get the blood sample they need, so mission accomplished, even though this innocent dude, I mean, maybe we don't know how innocent he is, but he dead. Yeah,
we know that he's like an accountant for Marcone, so.
Yeah, which is always questionable. Like, accountant for a mobster, what does that really mean?
Yeah.
So next thing that happens, one of the best moments of the book was when Harry goes to goes to the Carpenters, talks with Michael. Michael helps set his arm, and they kind of have this conversation about Harry being good or not, and what his, what are the lines that he can't cross, and how does he know that he's not turning into a monster? And Michael is always there with the powerful conversations for Harry that really kind of helps him stay grounded.
Yeah, so this is kind of where Harry lays it all out on the line. He's like, he kind of cops up to everything that he's done and says, and then Michael says, I'm sorry that you had to make those choices, but you had no other, given those set of choices, you did the best you could. Mm-hmm. And so it does make Harry feel better. He kind of leaves with a skip and a step, except for the fact that he neglected to tell Michael that Molly has become the Winter Lady, and instead infers that they've had a relationship. So that was kind of interesting. And it's always interesting to me that Harry makes such a big deal, like, oh, I'm going to tell people the truth and let them make their own decisions and see how they react. Unless he doesn't, unless it's for plot reasons or whatever reason.
Well, there's a reason here, right? Because I think he felt like it was Molly's place to impart this information.
Which is fair, but there's other times, specifically in the next book, where it is his kind of, the onus is on him to tell somebody something, and he decides not to until a very important point in time. And so I don't know, it just seems like with all of his monologues about how important honesty with the people you trust and friends you have is, it seems like this is a big thing to keep from Michael. Especially when it was his fault that it happened to Molly. I mean, it's not like he's more than tangentially related to this.
Oh yeah, yeah. I agree with his decision to not tell Michael. I think this probably does need to come from Molly, and it should be a conversation maybe they all three have together. But he hasn't been able to get a hold of Molly. She's been basically held captive from him by Mab. So what can he do? And that's always the Dresden dilemma, right? Like he tries to do his best, but sometimes it's like, what can he do? He can only do so much. And even though he says he's, we believe he's a basically good person, but that doesn't mean he's above making mistakes.
Yeah, that's true. We definitely have seen the fallibility of Harry Dresden in almost every book. So.
Yeah. So we meet up again, and the planning begins now. And we learn that Nicodemus is going after the Holy Grail. There are 3 gates here in the Hades vault that need to be passed. There's a fire gate, an ice gate, a blood gate. We don't get the whole plan. We're not going to get this until later. And we also learn that there has been an invisible goat eater hanging around, and Harry learns that it is a Genswaka, which is basically a Nagalashi, like maybe a little bit different type of Bigfoot type of thing. There's several different types, and actually in the next book, there's more of a discussion on the differences. But the end result here is that this thing is going to stick Harry with a iron nail and take him out.
Yeah, I mean, this guy means business, and he goes from 0 to 100 real fast just because Harry says that he's had dealings with another type of Bigfoot who
the Nagalashi.
Yeah, and so I don't know, it kind of seemed weird. It kind of seemed like this was also a point where short stories probably could. I assume that there's a short story about this, right?
Well, there are 3 short stories involving a character named River's Shoulders, who is a different type of Bigfoot that I referenced as being like that I made an analogy of being like Loyal, the Ogier from Wheel of Time, and he's in Peace Talks and in several of the short stories.
Yeah, I don't know. It seemed like this. It was clear that this character I wasn't aware of, and that he goes from 0 to 100 real fast. So that was interesting. It was also interesting that he basically allows Harry to have this dialogue with his subconscious at this crucial point in time.
Yeah, and this is how Harry learns that the parasite is actually a spirit of intellect that is the offspring of his relationship with Lashael. So interesting that that's still, a thing lurking around. And I like that Lashael wasn't just banished and that was the end of the story. Like there is this continual thing going on here because this was a big deal for several books. And so Harry's basically pregnant with this spirit and he needs Molly's help or delivering the baby will kill him. So kind of funny to have Harry being pregnant.
Yeah, so I actually really like this part. And it was cool in the fact that it was set up with the migraines that he's been having for a couple of books. It was also interesting that this whole spirit of intellect we've been exposed to through Bob. And yeah, I thought it really worked, learning this piece of information. So
yeah, like you said, we've had this idea. We know what a spirit of intellect is. It's happened with Bob in a few different ways, including the episode of Harry Dresden that was, what's it called? That was like Ultron, the Bob Ultron from Marvel. I've been rewatching the Marvel movies, so I feel like I always have a lot of Marvel references off top of mind. I have another one coming up later on that we'll see what you think about. Anyway, Harry now meets up with with Butters and Murphy, and this is actually where he learns about the natural inhibitor thing and his body limits. And they talk about kind of what's been going on in the year intervening. Murphy tells Harry that Butters has been trying to protect people and tells him how bad the FOMOR thing is and that they're taking kids off of the street and just kind of the state of the world a little bit. So at least we get some explanation of what's going on outside of this small zoomed in plot here.
Yeah. And we also learned that I think that this is the point where it's referenced something about how Butters tried to save some kids from a fire and only got some of them out or something. There's this conversation here that is clear that Butters has been acting as kind of this vigilante of sorts, and he's kind of racking up some emotional baggage from that.
Yeah, and I know Josh from Phantology loves Butters and loves that Butters, who started off as this real D tier character, is now slowly powering up, and we'll kind of see a lot more of this at the very end of the book. But it's cool to see this normal guy who was at first terrified of everything now being this vigilante that's trying to save Chicago in the way that he can.
Yeah, I thought it was great. So, yeah, I enjoyed that scene.
So then there's a little bit of backstory with Nicodemus and Tessa and Deirdre. I hope I'm saying that right. That's always been a tough name for me, so that may be wrong. Anyway, that's my attempt. So then they learn that they have to start the job from this building that is owned by Marcone. We don't actually see Marcone in this book, but he kind of looms over the plot a little bit. And so they have to break into the security vault, and then Harry will be able to get into the underworld. And as they're discussing all of these things, they learn that someone is listening in, and who would it be but someone we just talked about, Butters, who has put a bug into the band-aids that he wrapped around Harry's arms and is trying to listen in because he still doesn't trust Harry. And then the goons, the ghouls, are going to try to kill Butters. I mean, this dude who is not a part of this, and Harry has to try to pretend that he's doing his duty on the Nicodemus team, but he doesn't really want to kill Butters. Butters doesn't believe him, and he sticks Bob on him. Bob understands, and then him and Harry kind of put this show of trying to kill each other but missing. So this is kind of this fun layered plot.
Yeah. So quick fact check: it wasn't the ghouls. It was what's his name? Binder's henchman, right?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Binder's
Yeah.
ability. Yeah.
Yeah. So Binder
we already dealt with the ghouls. That's right.
Yeah. And so we have this chase through Chicago, and it's really interesting because it adds a fun dynamic that Binder's henchmen are all dressed in what I consider what I think about Men in Black or whatever. They have suit coats on, white shirt or whatever, and they're kind of chasing through it. It's kind of a fun. I don't know if that's how it actually is. Maybe
does it remind you of the Matrix at all?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the Matrix or Men in Black. Kind of this is, I don't know. It's a fun scene to think about though. And then with Nagloshi, or what? It's not Nagloshi. It's what's it called? The shape.
The Jens Waka.
Yeah, Jens Waka kind of also trailing around, and he's also concerned about Nicodemus flying over, and so you kind of have this chase through Chicago, and then you also have Butters whipping out all these little magical power-ups throughout this fight that he's been able to concoct.
I'm going to go back and correct my pronunciation. I'm going to stick with Ganashqua. Ganashqua. Yeah. Oh, man. Pronunciations are not my strong suit. I'm sorry, listeners. But yeah, it was fun. Like you say, it's fun to see where Butters has gone and that he kind of has these little abilities here and there, and he's trying his best. Anyway, they all go back to the Carpenters, and unfortunately this means that Harry's cover is blown, and so he can either give up Butters or he can betray his orders from Mab. So once again, Harry is in an impossible situation, and in this case Murphy is kind of the one who steps in to help out Harry. So she grabs the sword, Philoctius, again, another hard one, which she'd been disguising this as a rocket launcher, which is fun. And then Nicodemus kind of surrenders, but doesn't really. And then the Genswaka starts trying to kill Harry. And then Murphy tries to use the sword against Nicodemus in a big moment. But since she's using it in a way that doesn't really work because he has quote unquote surrendered, this is a untrustworthy use of the sword, and as a result it breaks and becomes an ordinary sword, and Nicodemus destroys it, which is huge for him because he's all about trying to kill these swords.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting how Murphy was using the sword correctly for a large part of this battle, and then she like says like "damn you" or something right as she's swinging the sword, and that's like the moment that it stops becoming special. And it just kind of shows you how close to the chest that Nicodemus was playing this thing, you know. So that was
And it's
interesting.
not the fact that she swore, like invoked a, it's not that she referenced hell. It's just the fact that Nicodemus had surrendered and was not necessarily like an enemy. I mean, he was an enemy, but he wasn't actively acting against them.
From what I thought it was a condemnation. It was a judgment, and I don't think Knights of the Cross
Sure.
are supposed to like pass judgment. They're supposed to, be the right hand of God or whatever. Like,
Yeah, it's like in Death Masks when they go to beat up that snake boy Denarian and the knights can't do anything, but Harry can because he had surrendered himself.
yeah. So one other thing that I wanted to talk about this was it's clear that like Butters got himself in a situation here that like Harry would have gotten himself in like book one, where he's kind of clumsily stumbling on something huge that he then has to try and
Yeah.
get out of, and he's doing so with the help of kind of limited resource, and Bob is a big time like helper for him, and so it just kind of seems like this is like Bob or that Butters is almost on Harry's level at the beginning of the series here.
And what do you think about Butter's choice here? Because it's interesting. I mean, jumping ahead, he becomes the Knight of the Cross. And is Butters really someone who's exhibiting a whole lot of faith? Like, maybe he's not the most worthy Knight of the Cross at this point because he doesn't trust Harry. And as a result, it leads to this action that's going to destroy the sword in the first place. And I mean, it's hard to put all the blame on Butters, but really, he's the one who created this whole situation.
Yeah, I agree, and it's in this book, right, where Michael says that Butters has faith in Harry, like, or is that in Peace Talks that we learn that?
There's two similar conversations I don't remember.
Yeah, maybe that is Peace Talks. I don't know. I listen to these books back to back, so. But yeah, it's interesting that it's unclear what qualifies Butters to be a Knight of the Cross at this point.
I mean, I think he's been set up for several books to become a Knight of the Cross. It's not something that Butcher is just pulling out. But you do kind of wonder, this action alone kind of makes me think like, I don't know if this dude is the greatest Knight of the Cross.
Yeah, I agree.
So maybe he's still got some growth to go.
It was interesting too that Nicodemus drops the bomb that like typically Knight of the Crosses only lasts like 36 hours, or like that's the average lifespan of a Knight of the Cross. Like they pretty much only have one mission to do, and then they do it.
I mean, we've seen a few drop already.
Yeah.
One such, Michael is now going to resolve the situation in a really heroic moment. This has got to be like a top Dresden moment as far as nobility. So Michael is going to surrender himself in order to let Nicodemus, to pacify Nicodemus's bloodlust here. Michael makes this deal that he's going to come out of the house, and Uriel is involved here because Uriel, the Archangel, has been protecting the Carpenter residence, and as Harry and Michael leave the yard, leave protection, Uriel tells Harry to stall. Harry does so, and Uriel then transfers his power to Michael to make him once again a full Knight of the Cross, and then faced with Michael, who is healed, and Harry with his soul fire, Nicodemus backs down and agrees to another ceasefire truce type of thing and says, okay, Harry, you can get another replacement for Murphy since he just beat her up really bad. Harry chooses Michael. Nicodemus leaves. Plot goes on. So nice moment here.
Yeah. So one thing that I would thought about is how crazy it is that I sincerely thought that Michael was going to die here. Like, I don't know. I remember thinking, man, this could be it, because I thought that Murphy might die. And then I was like, okay, it's not going to be Murphy. Then
and it seemed like he was prepared to die. Like he was willing to.
Yeah. And so it's crazy to me that Butcher can make the stakes seem really high. I go back to this thing that we haven't seen like a main character death yet. We've seen like some kind of side characters die, but there hasn't been a main character death yet. Besides, whatever.
Man,
Besides Harry,
Harry died. Harry died. You gotta accept that Harry died.
dude. No, Butter straight up told us this book that he didn't think that Harry was ever fully dead, past the point of return.
I
So
mean, sure, he's maybe like nearly dead, but
whatever.
Butcher
I'm
killed
just
him.
My point being is that somehow the stakes still felt really high, and it felt like Michael could die, even though that hasn't happened in the series yet. So it was kind of a cool feeling to me.
So I think what you're saying is you haven't felt a death that's had a huge emotional impact, because even when Harry died, you knew he was coming back. Everyone kind of knew he was coming back in some way. But if Michael was to die, he would be X'd out, and he would probably not be coming back. And that would really, that would be heartbreaking.
Right. It would be heartbreaking for you as a reader. It'd be heartbreaking, like a lot of stuff for Harry to work through. And so that was cool. It was also interesting to see Uriel kind of acting out of more brashness than we're led to believe that he's able. I feel like at the end of Ghost Story, he feels like he's a good guy, but also he's above the fray of mortality almost. He's not going to concern himself overly with these mortals.
Yeah. But here he does.
Here he does, for sure.
And it's because of Michael's action, right? Because of Michael's noble willingness to sacrifice himself. And we discover that Uriel hasn't just healed Michael. What he's done is like imparted his power over to him for a limited time. And if Michael were to misuse this power, Uriel himself would become a fallen angel. And in the meantime, Uriel is vulnerable, and Harry actually accidentally like injures him. And that's how they discover, like, wait a second, I'm not supposed to be able to do that to you.
Yeah. So that was cool. It was almost like this is an extension of the magic rules around the swords of you can't misuse their power, otherwise they lose the power.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like taking that same concept and 100xing it.
So Murphy goes to the ER because of the seriousness of her injuries. I think we kind of glossed over that, but Nicodemus really beats her up. And maybe we did kind of talk about, Harry's maybe mistake there in choosing her to be involved in these big players. And what do you think about Harry finally meeting Maggie? Like, this has been a few books now that we haven't had it. And here's the big moment. And it's nice, right?
It's a nice moment. Again, I feel like it was kind of wedged in there almost. It didn't take away from the moment, but it certainly didn't have as big of a build-up as I would have hoped for.
There's a better moment, I think, with Maggie in the next book where we see their relationship a little bit more in like a small scale type of thing that really speaks to, the love that Harry has for his daughter.
Honestly, I feel like this whole how smoothly this moment goes should be attributed entirely to the Carpenter family kind of preparing Maggie, because Harry doesn't almost deserve this good moment. I mean, he does because we like Harry, but he hasn't been the most responsible after, he's avoided seeing his daughter for the past year.
There's been reasons, right? I mean, but maybe he could have made it work.
I mean, everybody thinks that he could have / should have made it work. And so the reason, I don't know, I give a lot of credit to the Carpenter family for preparing Maggie for this moment.
Yeah. Fantastic family. Definitely someone you want to be on your block. These are great neighbors. Except for the times where their enemies show up and almost take out their entire... Yeah, that would maybe be a bad time to be living next to the Carpenters.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we finally head out on the job. There's been a lot of build-up, and here we go. So Harry has to put on these manacles to get through these magic security precautions, and they get through the vault door, and Harry opens the way into the underworld. So, I mean, there's a few other things that happen here. Gray gets through using Harvey's likeness to do the retinal scan, etc. But Harry also realizes that these manacles are going to be maybe problematic because he can't remove them without killing all the crew outside the vault. So Harry's a little handicapped. And we right away get a betrayal as Tessa tries to kill Harry. So the crew's not sticking together for very long.
Yeah. So I think that they So first of all, what's her name? I always forget the
Tessa, Hannah, Anna.
Anna. Yeah, because Anna kind of has to crack the safe, and that's interesting because there was a bit of it wasn't the same safe, but it actually ended up being easier to crack, which Harry helped her see. So that was kind of up the stakes because Nicodemus was like ready to kill her if she can open the case or the safe. And this is interesting because it shows that Nicodemus, while being a mastermind, is kind of irrational. You know what I mean? It's not her fault that he didn't have completed information. And it's also, if he does kill her, then what? Like, they're not getting the safe anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
Yeah. Nicodemus is a little bit of a hothead. And I mean, when I was explaining those details, might have kind of like jumped around a little bit. But, the heist begins. A lot of heist things are happening. They make their way into the underworld. They get through the gate of fire. They get through the gate of ice. And then they get to the gate of blood. And this is the time for my next Marvel reference. And do you know what it's going to be?
Yeah, for sure. I actually thought about this as well, where
Yeah.
Thanos has to
Yeah,
sacrifice.
exactly. We're getting the Soul Stone here, is what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Nicodemus has to kill his daughter. I mean, this is a really strong parallel. Are we sure there's not any connection here?
I'm not well versed enough in the MCU or the MCU / the comic books to know if this was a scene in the comic books as well. Because obviously this book came out before Endgame did.
Yeah. I mean, could we? It's possible that the MCU guys, the directors, the Russo brothers, right? Are the Russo brothers the Marvel guys? They could have read Dresden.
Aren't the Russo brothers the Matrix people?
No, those are the Warchanowski or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible that they read it, but also this is a pretty strong theme throughout a lot of literature that actually Nicodemus ends up pointing out, like Abraham sacrificing Isaac, and you
Sure.
and like quote unquote, at least there's a point to this one,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's a strong parallel.
Not the first time we've seen a father have to sacrifice their offspring in order to get to something good. And in this case, we're getting into the Hades vault, and there's a bunch of diamonds there that Anna grabs. And then Harry finds these 5 holy artifacts that are quite important. We don't know exactly the importance of all of them, but I mean, there's no way these things are just going to be written off. So we've got, and they all kind of have references back to religious and historical importance. So we have the shroud, which we've seen before. We have the crown of thorns. We have the spear of destiny, which is now just a knife, but it was like the spear that pricked Christ's side. And then there's also the Holy Grail itself and the placard, which said, here's Christ, King of the Jews, so, something like that. Maybe I need to go back and read the Bible a little bit on this one. But these artifacts, they seem important, right? But we're not really sure exactly why.
Yeah, so this seems important. It also seems like this should have been something like, why was Nicodemus we still don't know why he was really overly concerned with the goblet. So and did he not know that these other artifacts were there? That seems interesting. And this is also around the time that Harry has his meeting with Hades, right?
Yeah, so Hades makes time stand still, and then him and Hades have a little meet and greet in a different place, and Hades says, okay, Harry, you have guest rights, and good luck, and I know what you're up to here. That's kind of interesting. Like, we got Hades on our side. We have another god coming into play along with Odin.
Yeah, so this is like another example of Dresden kind of flipping the script a little bit, where he paints Hades actually like a good guy who's just fulfilling responsibilities and is just a stand-up guy almost, Yeah,
I started watching Lucifer a little bit based off your recommendation. So same type of, friendly little devil guy.
Yeah, and well, it's interesting too because he like drew a bunch of comparisons between himself and Harry, like having a dog and being strong-willed and not judging your morality based off of other people's views. And then he's like, so basically, I just wanted to shake your hand. So it's just really kind of a fun. Actually, during this, I thought that we were going to learn that Hades was going to be preparing Dresden to take his job or something like that. I was kind of
Hmm.
prepping for that reveal. It didn't end up happening, but it was kind of a theory I had as I was reading it.
Okay. I mean, Harry's already been prepped for a pretty big job as the Winter Knight, but that'd be an interesting standoff between Mab and Hades.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Harry goes back to normal time. Valmont grabs the placard and the crown. Harry grabs the shroud and puts the knife. I think it's like the Amatharia or something like that is what they call it, at least in peace talks. Again, pronunciation problems, but that's the Spear of Destiny thing. So he grabs that, and then everyone starts to betray each other. So Nicodemus says, "Okay, we've got what we need to, so let's kill Harry and Michael." And it's looking bad because they are outnumbered, and Gray appears, and it's 4-on-2, and then Harry says the code word "game over," and that changes everything because we time skip back to what Harry was doing back at the beginning of the book, and we learn that Harry was meeting with Kringle, Vadarung, Odin, and he learned that Nicodemus can hear things that people are saying, anything around them, through his shadow powers. And so Harry needs a plant of his own on Nicodemus's team, and he does this by hiring Goodman Gray before Nicodemus cans, and then gets him to pretend to accept Nicodemus's offer. And so Gray's been on Harry's side the whole time. Nice twist.
Big twist here. Yeah. This was interesting. I mean, I don't know. What did you think about it? I know that you've done a little bit of research in this area.
Yeah, so it's actually cool if you go back and reread. Harry and Gray had a code word that they would use. So anytime Gray asked Harry a question and said the word wizard inside of the question, embedded in the phrase, that meant he was like really looking for Harry to give him some direction as his boss. And then whatever Harry responded would be what he needed Gray to do. There's a nice Reddit post that kind of lays these things out. So that's really fun. And it really shows how this relationship worked. And we still don't really understand why did Gray accept Harry's offer, and like who exactly is Gray, and how did Harry really know about him. Like there's some significance to this dude. He's real powerful.
Yeah. So now we have Goodman Gray and Harry and Michael versus Nicodemus, and we learn that Nicodemus has brought 2 other Denarians along that has been kind of his ace in the hole, right?
Yeah, so Asher takes up Lashiel's coin, and the Jenswaka takes up Urisel's coin, and so now we've got 3 Denarians versus Harry and Michael and Gray. 3-on-3.
Right.
Fair fight.
Fair fight. And it's interesting because I wasn't aware that Denarians could be anybody besides humans, right? Like it's interesting that other creatures can kind of take up these coins and use them. So
yeah, I don't think we've really thought about that before.
Yeah, it was also unclear though. Like, it's hard for me to know power levels of Denarians. You know what I mean? It's sometimes they seem like they can be taken down relatively easily, and other times it seems like they're unstoppable forces in and of themselves. So that was kind of hard for me to measure.
Power levels are always a little tricky. I feel like in the Dresden fights, like Harry can always summon a little extra oomph when he needs to, when the stakes are the highest.
Right. Harry can summon umph. And we also aren't like entirely clear about power level of Goodman Gray. Like we know that he heals quickly and that he's pretty ruthless, and
he's part Neglashi, which
we find out at the end.
Yeah, which you find out at the end, which makes sense, which explains his shape-shifting abilities.
Yeah. So that was So but I like this fight. Nick like on his feet, he like losing, despite the fact that Nick thought that he was gonna win,
Yeah, how the turntables have turned on Nicodemus, and Harry and crew do kind of win the fight, but not entirely. Nicodemus escapes and says, "I'm going after your daughter, and I know where she is, so watch out." And so they all escape and run back to the Carpenters.
Yeah, so this is interesting in the fact that it was set up that the escape was going to be one of the trickiest parts, like how to get out of Marcone's secure vault with, and they just kind of do it, like out of necessity, which I don't know. It felt kind of weird to me.
Yeah, maybe it was just because now the stakes were so high that rather than spend a whole lot of time explaining how they were doing this thing, we're like, okay, let's focus on what we need to do here, which is get back to the Carpenters and save them and Maggie.
Yeah, I understand that it worked like with the plot, but I wish that Butcher maybe might not have.
Oh, like had more of a built-in reason why it was so easy.
Well, I mean, he had like Dresden create the like veil with like the distraction or whatever, and they're able to sneak. It made sense, but he didn't need to build it up if it wasn't going to be a big thing for them to accomplish. Anyway, so yeah, but that was a minor thing. They get back to the Carpenters in record time, right?
Yeah, they get back there. So minor criticism, but then they do get back to the Carpenters, and Nicodemus is attacking the house with all of his tongueless goon squire things that we saw at the beginning of the book. And Charity is captured, dragged out into the street, where Nicodemus is planning to make her watch as he burns down the house around her children. And Harry comes in just in time to stop his first attempt, but then Mab's earring breaks very conveniently. I mean, this is a classical, how do we make the stakes work out for fantasy? Well, let's just make them run out of magic at the right time. Every author does this. And so the earring breaks and Harry's he's immobilized. He's got incredible pain going on. And luckily Butters and Bob are able to step up to the plate.
Yeah, so this was interesting because it definitely this is where the one-off line of Butters rescuing kids from a burning building kind of you're ready for it to come full circle. You're like, oh man, that was some good foreshadowing. Luckily that doesn't happen because Harry's able to heroically throw the hilt of the sword, and he's trying to throw it to Murphy, but she fumbles the
Charity.
catch. Or to Charity, sorry.
Yeah, Murphy's in the ER.
They are. He's trying to throw it to Charity. She fumbles the catch, and somehow it falls into Butters' hands.
And in one of the top moments of Dresden, it reforms itself, and a new Knight of the Cross is born, wielding a lightsaber. Butcher loves Star Wars, man.
Yeah, you can't fault him for that, but it was pretty cool. I enjoyed. This was definitely like, we always talk about how the Dresden books are kind of like an action movie in your head, and this was definitely one of those scenes where you could picture it happening very easily.
Yeah, no idea what Butcher's deal is with Lucasfilms here in terms of rights, but we do have a literal Jedi Knight now wielding a Knight of the Sword of the Cross.
Yeah.
And it was cool because you saw the hilt break and you thought things were really bad here, but the sword reforms itself, which is
and
nice.
This was also foreshadowed by Michael. He said something like, hope it's not as bad as you think. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Michael's always there with faith and hope. So that's pretty much a wrap for the action of the book. This is enough to run off Nicodemus, and things have worked out for the most part. So Harry wakes up after passing out, and Molly has arrived and saved him and helped with this birth of the spirit of intellect, but we don't know too much about it yet, and we won't until the next book.
Yeah. Yep. So should we do some worst of the best here? I got a couple actually.
Okay. I don't think I'm just kind of going through for any other things to wrap up. We get some stuff with the diamonds and Gray, and Molly still hasn't told her parents about what's going on, but she is buying the house across the street to watch over him, and Michael gets the other sword back and has another good conversation with Michael about being a monster and that Michael believes in him. And the book ends with Harry holding Maggie, very determined to, be righteous and be able to follow through with the trust that everyone has placed in him. And so on that fantastic ending, let's hear your worst of the best moments.
Okay, well, I want to. This kind of plays into my worst of the best moments, where part of that ending, Harry pays Goodman Gray $1 for his work, oh,
Is
and
it a dollar or is it like a penny? It's a
oh,
tiny denomination of money.
I think it's $1 because he has to
Okay.
go back in and ask Michael for it or something.
Okay.
Anyway, so this is part of one of my worst of the best is Goodman Gray. Great reveal, and it just seemed like it was one of the rare times that Dresden has done a reveal where, looking back, I think to myself, I could have spotted it. Like enough pieces were laid that I could have figured this out, and
Mm,
it really makes sense. I just wish that Goodman Gray had more personality or felt more like a really well defined character, especially
yeah.
because like all of these other characters did feel like that. Like Binder felt really like a character I could talk to, and Hannah felt like a character I could talk to, and Anna felt like like all of these characters felt like real people, but Goodman Gray just kind of didn't, which is weird for Dresden. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Gray is such an enigma. We just don't know what's going on with him.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's so weird, but we feel like he's going to be in Harry's corner for some reason. And how did he know that Nick was going to hire him? And I don't know. Anyway, best in terms of reveal and in terms of setup for that reveal. Worst in terms of there still being some severe like characterization, like lack of characterization taking place here, and lack of motivations around that character. So yeah, one of my worst of the best. I have another one, but I want to give you a chance to do yours if you have one.
We kind of already talked about this, but I just struggle with this book in the context of the previous ones and all of these big plot threads that are mentioned a little bit, but are going to be so important for the rest of the series. And in this small weekend, it's not a thing. And I know that every Dresden book is kind of like a year apart, and it's, the Butcher describes it as the worst weekend of Harry's year. But it just seems like narratively we need more in terms of what's going on in the wider world, because in the previous books we had opened it up to that world, and now we're just zooming back out. And I get it, we're just looking through Harry's eyes, and it makes sense as the book itself, but maybe we could have just had a few more hints. I mean, we did have the fight with the Fomor briefly, and there was some chatter about what's going on, but maybe just like a conversation with someone who knew what was going on, like a brief,
A gatekeeper conversation or
yeah,
something.
yeah, someone coming in and saying like, we're still holding the horde of outsiders at bay. So, Harry, continue with what you're doing. It's going to be vital for the Winter Court, something like that.
Yeah, so this is I wholeheartedly agree with this because previous you could explain it away as this is just the worst weekend of Harry's life. But now that we know that there's a continual threat going on, you would expect Harry to continually be fighting that threat, right? Or at least be because he's one of the few people alive that know about Nemesis. So I feel like he kind of has, and this goes back to us being not super clear as to why he has to stay on the island. Maybe if it was just because of his affliction or not. But like it seems like he should be devoting every waking moment to fighting this potentially world-ending thing. And if we knew that he had done that and this is just something else that happened along the way, I would be okay with that.
Yeah, just some kind of update. Someone popping in
Yeah.
and saying like, "Hey, we're good to go. For this weekend. Go ahead, Harry. Like, we don't necessarily need your support, or I'll give you an update after. Like, let's check in. Let's have our morning stand up and let you know how things are going with the outer gates."
Yeah.
But it's such a huge looming thing. It's just like this elephant in the room. The entire book.
Yeah. Okay. So real fast, my last worst of the best is I just didn't feel like the heist was very heisty. I mean, the the only part that was kind of crazy was the part where Nicodemus had to sacrifice his daughter, which granted was a cool kind of twist there. But like, we had Hannah just kind of walk through the wall of fire.
Mm.
and we had Harry parkour through the obstacle course of ice. Like it didn't feel like, if the point of the book was to be this cool like Ocean's 11 heist book, it just I just didn't feel like it had very cool, like very much
Sure.
heisty, you know.
It did have tons of betrayal, which you always get in the heist story, where the team's going to turn on each other at some point. But there needs to be like more obstacles, or Hades needed to show up and actually like we all have to fight him together a little bit to get the thing, or something like that, or everything's gonna, like an Aladdin thing where everything is just gonna crumble as we're running out, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe more just like, I don't know. That was maybe a minor criticism, but it just felt like, if this is the one shot that Butcher takes at being a heist book, you got to like make that shot count, you know. And maybe he just tried to fit so much else in there with like Butters and the Swords of Destiny and like, or the Knights of the Cross, like all these things that kind of end up overshadowing the heist part of
Yeah,
it. Because even like, look at what we spent the time of this podcast talking about. We talked about so much stuff, and we kind of glanced over the part where they're actually like pulling off the heist, you know?
right, exactly. Yeah, and I think we've talked about this with other Dresdens. We really like the individual books, but I think Butcher really does have to be careful going forward that it's such a large, expansive story right now. It's hard to please all of the different storylines. Like, we have all these characters and things that we care about. For example, Thomas was like not even a thing in this book,
Marco
but we
hasn't
really,
been a thing forever. Like Marco
yeah,
was one of my favorite parts up until like book 10, and then he's been a part of the plot without being a part of the plot at all, you know?
yeah. And they come back in the next books. So maybe we just have to go back to, this is the difference between urban fantasy. We're going to have
Yeah.
shorter, more focused books. And this is fine. We're not trying to be too critical. I think we're just trying to like dive into the differences and why we see these things happening. But we have shorter, more focused books on, Harry's zoomed in interactions. Harry's not going to interact with everyone within the course of one adventure. But we have to accept that. And this is different than an epic fantasy 1,000-page book where every character comes in with every plot line. So maybe it's the worst of the best because we like urban fantasy and we think it's awesome how Butcher's doing it. But we also like epic fantasy, and we're kind of struggling to rectify the way that these stories work.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, so that's a wrap for Skin Game. Thanks for listening. You can find more reviews from Phantology Books online at www.phantologybooks.com, on social media at Phantology Books. Join our Discord. Invites are on our posts, on our social media platforms, on our website. Join there and let us know what books you like, what books you'd like us to cover. Now that we've reached the end of Dresden, I think Ben is like at a big crossroads, because we've been reviewing Dresden with you, and now you have a decision to make.
This is big. So I actually just jumped back into the Two Towers, the second book of Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
But again, I'm going to plug, if you're thinking about how we consume books so quickly, a lot of the times is through audiobooks. We do have a partnership with Audible right now, so you can get a free book on us. So go for that if you want, if you haven't already.
And the downside, of course, of listening to audiobooks is that sometimes we don't get every detail, and we try our best to go back and use internet resources, etc., to make these reviews quality, because I think people enjoy these kind of plot walkthroughs, especially as we get up to Battleground. The idea is that this is something that you can do in place of a reread, but please be forgiving on us for small mistakes that get made here and there.
Yeah.
And also, Phantology has a Patreon, so if you like the podcast, you can support us. Just throw us a few bucks, and that will go directly back into everything we do here. We have, hosting fees and fees on Zencaster to make our editing and production process faster. We're also throwing out prizes to the winner of our monthly our monthly Twitter polls. So this is just something we do for fun, but we like to throw in a few bucks to make it higher quality. So if you like the podcast, consider supporting on Patreon. We also have a merch store with a few kind of unique, fun designs, including a shirt that I'm going to be sporting pretty soon as shipping arrives, which is slightly delayed because of COVID. But that said, thank you for listening. Thanks for supporting Phantology. Just listening itself is enough support, more than we can really ask for. So see you later, Ben.
See you soon.